Hello, my friends. I'm just going to adjust my camera, prepare for a wobble. Not too bad. How is everyone this morning? Lots of you joining in already. Lori's asking, anyone else here? Well, we are here now. Robin in California. Patricia, good morning. Lori's in Yakima, Washington. That's close to me. Linda's in Regina, Saskatchewan. Sandra in Vermont. Sherry in Kamloops, BC, Lynn in South Louisiana, Pilar from sunny Arizona. Fantastic. Well, I'm Susan Smith. Welcome to my studio, Stitched by Susan. Today's a great quilting day. As you can see out my window, the sun is shining, and yesterday it was rainy, and so I said it was a great quilting day. So you've deduced from this that every day is a good quilting day, right? Anyway, for the month of April, I am coming on to YouTube Live every day for 10 to 15 minutes and just chatting often about the project I'm working on or just some thoughts about quilting that I thought may be of interest to other machine quilters. I am working at a long arm, but a lot of these things will translate well for any kind of machine quilting. So at a domestic, at a sit-down long arm, any of those things. So feel free to type in questions as we talk. As always, I so apologize for the wobbly camera. I have it on a tripod, but when I touch it, to scroll up and down for the comments, everything wiggles a little bit. I'm sorry about that. As you can see, I've got a quilt loaded today, kind of a pineapple design, and it's in Camille Ross Kelly's, I think it's the Nantucket line. It's the blues and kind of soft greens, so pretty. And I'm quilting, you probably can't see it in this light, but I'm quilting my Crazy Eights design freehand on it, and you can see my trusty blue painter's tape, one of my all-time favorite tools, and it's just giving me a guideline for my rows because this is row based, and so it'll keep them all nice and straight and even. So lovely, so easy. So I wanted to talk a little bit more today about tension and stitch formation. I know I've talked about this a couple of times already, so if you haven't seen the past episodes, you might look back at those. This is definitely not a formal class. It's just kind of my free flow of thoughts regarding lovely stitch formation and what to do when you're having tension issues. So today I thought I would talk kind of specifically about tension and adjustments. So tension is going to be the relation of your top thread to your bottom thread and how they form that stitch. And if it's not forming well, what do you need to adjust? And then some other factors that play into it that sometimes we think is a tension issue, but really it is a stitch formation issue. So those two topics are so interrelated, it's hard to separate them. But we see it, the end result we see is a tension problem. The stitches aren't forming right? So, but sometimes many things can lead into that. So I see lots of you chiming in, and where you're coming from, Minnesota I saw, Finland I saw. So glad you're here. Okay. Tension headaches, that's what I call it, because tension can be a headache for machine quilters. When it's not working, it can be the most frustrating, nail-biting thing on the planet. So it's helpful to have kind of a repertoire of things to try. I meant to attach to the show notes, so I'll go do it right after we get off air. I have a Pinterest post that is 16 checkpoints of things that you can try out and look for, tips that you can try when trying to fix tension issues. I probably should update it. It had to do with my Gamble machine, so a couple of them are more specific to the type of tension adjustment that I had on there, but it at least gives you a jumping off point. But some of them I'm going to highlight today as well. So for the very basic, let's start right there. Your top thread and your bottom thread ideally are crossing and hooking right in the middle of your layers of the quilt so that you have a lovely stitch on the top and a lovely stitch on the bottom, and you don't see that little twist or join that's in the middle. That can be difficult to achieve. And in general, if you're seeing a straighter thread on one or the other, so let's say when you look at the top of your quilt, it looks quite straight and pulled flat, and on the bottom you're seeing very distinct stitches, that can mean your top thread is too tight. The tension is too tight and it's holding too securely and pulling up that bottom thread. It can also mean that your bottom tension is too loose and relaxed and it's letting itself get pulled too easily. So for me and the machines that I work on, generally, I examine the bottom tension first, and that's kind of my foundation, and I work with adjusting that bottom tension until I have decent tension, and then I fine tune with the top tension on my machine. So On my Bernina, I have a Bernina Q24, which you see over my shoulder. Her name is Stella. Berninas have a digital tension adjustment, which is kind of a cool thing. And I have no way really of showing you the screen. But my screen when I'm working is right here in front of me, and the tension is represented as a little diagram. You actually see the top and the bottom threads, and there's a digital number assigned to the tension. So the default is 4, and that works in general for most of the threads I use. Typically it's a 40 weight polyester. That 4.0 is spot on. So that's good in a couple of ways. Number one, I can see the picture, and if I move the tension adjustment up and down, the picture changes. If I move it down, that bottom thread kind of flatlines and the top gets much more distinct dips. So it's a very good visual aid for if I need that bottom tension to look like bigger stitches and it's looking flat, if I move that dial, if you will, that slider, I can visually see it change in the representation. So that helps me know what I'm doing and what it is that I want to adjust, top or bottom. But it also helps in this way. It's great for a baseline. So if I know that 4.0 is kind of the central, kind of the average, the mean, the default, that's kind of where I always start at. So even if I put in, say, a metallic thread and I don't know what the tension is going to be, I can make sure I'm starting at that 4.0, right? Because I can easily set it to 4.0 and then go from there. As opposed to machines which just have a dial that turns and no numbers or anything attached to it. You're a little more out to sea there because you're just relative to what it was before, right? You have no way to going back to the tension that you had last week that was perfect, really. So that is one of the things that I do love about the Bernina is that baseline, because there's a digital number attached. And if you own a Bernina, here's another little tip for you on the side. I tend to take my cones of thread, you can see my cone of cream colored thread on the top there, and I will actually write with a Sharpie on the bottom side of the cone what my good top tension is, and also what I set it for in the bobbin. So on the top it's 4.0, on the bobbin I usually set mine about 210. So I write 4.0 and 210 in Sharpie on my spool. And if I had a metallic thread and I found that 3.0 was working well for the top tension, I could write that in the bottom of the spool and know it when I come back to use it the next time, have a sort of starting point for that. Let's just see if there's any questions before I keep nattering on. Hello, hello, Sun Prairie, Wisconsin, Beamsville, Ontario, Surprise, Arizona. Oh gosh, I love that name, Surprise. Summery, Minnesota. Oh, lucky you. We were, side little story here, my sister and her husband were here overnight and they're traveling from northern British Columbia, Canada, down to Utah. And so of course they were hoping for warmer weather as they come. Seems logical, right? You're going 1,000 miles south, the weather should change. Nope. We had frost here last night. Their windshield was frosty this morning. Oh my goodness, it was chilly. They were so disgusted. Okay, let's see some more. Albany, New York, New Mexico, sunny, cool Saskatchewan, Joan, hi from the UK, Susan from Van Buren, Diana, oh, spent 3 hours last night ripping out tension problems. My solution was replacing the spring in the bobbin. So we've kind of talked about basic tension adjustments now. Have we talked about it on the top? Yeah, we did. We talked about the dial, or in my case, the digital adjustment. Let's talk a minute about some other factors that might be giving the result of poor tension, although they're not being fixed with your tension dial. And Diane mentioned one, which was the spring in her bobbin. And I touched on this a day or two ago. The backlash spring that is in the bottom of your bobbin casing, your bobbin rests against it, and when your bobbin is inserted in the machine, it exerts just a wee bit of pressure on that bobbin so that you're sewing along and thread is being wound out, and when you stop sewing, you want the bobbin to stop turning and not to keep on turning. So that's why it's called an anti-backlash spring, because otherwise that bobbin which is turning and you stop stitching, it might go on turning a time or two and mess with things. So yes, it is possible for that spring to lose its springiness. Certainly a drop, or when it comes out and you put it back in and you struggle with it, that can mess with the springiness of it. And that can be a simple fix, and usually just $1 or $2 fix as well. Someone mentioned in a comment the other day that they were using, I believe it was called a bobbin genie. For sure it was a genie, like a little magic circle that fits in the bottom. Is it silicone? Is it magnetic? I'm not even 100% sure, but it serves the same purpose, to keep that bobbin from spinning when you're not actually sewing. So whatever mechanism you use, that's a good thing to check, that that's in good working order and exerting the tension that it needs to against the bobbin. Another great thing to check is your threading apparatus. So I usually rethread kind of as a first check, both bottom and top. So I start with the bottom. If that fixes it, great. If it doesn't, I rethread the top thread. That's usually a little more complicated, but sometimes just fixes it. If threading is not fixing the issue, then sometimes I go to all the thread carriers. So they might be little pigtails, they might be tension discs, every place that your thread is going through or over. And I'll either clean out the lint, like maybe with a business card if it's a tension disc, or pull it apart and get a brush in there. Or if it's the little pigtails, I'll literally floss some thread through there, kind of feeling gently too, are there any burrs? Is there any catch or any unevenness? Because it is possible for burrs to form or for a groove to form, depending on what thread you've been using or how old your machine is. So those things can take a toll too. Another student commented a while back that you can get emery thread, like you know how you get emery boards for your nails, that you can get emery thread for flossing. I have searched on Amazon and I can't find any. If someone knows what that is or where one can find it, I'd love to know more about it, because the one time that I had a burr actually on my needle plate, I just got a piece of fine grit sandpaper and that's how I smoothed mine out. So, you know, maybe your technician or someone at your machine brand would have better solutions for that, but that's certainly a great thing to check for. And absolutely, rethreading will often uncover one of those things where maybe the thread has popped out of one of those holders or isn't nesting in it fully. That can mess with your tension very easily. So honestly, that's why rethreading to me is kind of my first line of defense. Probably change the needle is first and rethread is second for me. Just making sure that the thread is going through all the places it needs to. It's such a delicate stitch formation is so delicate, and if any of these things is off even a little bit, or two things are off a tiny bit, that adds up, right? And that can mess with your tension. So those are some easy fixes. Let's see what other comments we're getting here. Emery cloth, Pam Wiley is saying, okay, I'm gonna go looking for that. Because wouldn't that be handy if you had just a little bit of roughness in your cloth and you could just smooth things out that way? Like it's impossible for me to even think of all the things that could go wrong. But I'm thinking of the stitch plate and the burr that I had in mind. Do I know what happened? I absolutely don't. But you know, if you were to hit a ruler, or if you were to have too much tension on your fabric and the needle nicked the side of the, you know, where it enters the stitch plate, anything like that can make a little roughness, and that will affect the tension or the stitch formation. So that little emery cloth, if we can find that product, would be a great thing. Susan is saying, my Q16 Bernina will not wind tight unless I have the thread run through my fingers. Are you talking about threading the needle, or are you talking about winding the bobbin? And actually, oh, here's a little comment, Pam. Emery cloth can be ripped like fabric to the size you need. Oh, awesome. See, we're learning all kinds of things this morning. That's a product I feel like we all should have a little bit of in our studio. Okay, back to winding. On the Bernina, this can have to do with your type of thread too. And because I like to use 100% poly thread, it is a little more slippery. So I find the same thing. Even when I'm threading my machine, I do hang on to my thread as it's leaving the spool while I'm winding it through those areas. Otherwise, it doesn't pull properly into the tension discs. Does that make sense? So I don't have a grip of iron, but I'm just putting a little bit of resistance on there to make sure that it's fully settling in to the places it needs to settle into. Margot, emery cloth is great, can be found at hardware stores. Great. Donna was just asking that question, so now we all know it can be found at hardware stores. And if I remember, I'll go back and type that actually into the notes so that you can come back and look for it if you ever want to. Cindy is saying Mitchell's abrasive cords and tape. Okay, who knew? I did not know about all these products, so this sounds great. I feel like cord would be awesome for the little, you know, I call them pigtails that your thread often runs through, that you could just floss that through a little bit. And if there's any unevenness or tiny catches in there, that would smooth it out. So I think that covers a whole bunch of stuff, and gosh, we're almost at 15 minutes already. But I'm going to read back through comments again. Mona is saying test the bobbin every time. We've talked about that in past days. Yes, that's a great idea. Joan, if the bobbin has a small amount of thread when you finish a quilt, do you remove the thread to empty the bobbin or use it on another quilt? It depends on how much. If it's less than 5 yards, for sure, I toss it. Often even if it's less than 10, because that won't do much quilting. But that's my style of quilting. I'm kind of zooming along. If you're doing something small, like 1 block, you can get a lot of quilting out of 5 yards. So that's kind of up to each person. KK's Quilts, I have a fine ceramic file to polish needle plate nicks or sharpening seam rippers. Great idea. Emery cloth. Yep, few people are saying that. That's great. Lorraine, I heard somewhere not to do 5 things at once or you won't know the solution. Try one at a time. That's a great point too. And I kind of without thinking do that. But when you make the point, that is a worthwhile one. You know, change the needle and then sew again and see if that fixes it. Rethread the bobbin and sew again and see if that fixes it. Rethread the top, etc. Because it can help you to narrow down the solution. Being perfectly honest, in my own experience, there are times that I actually rethread once and then rethread again and then rethread again, and all of a sudden it works. And I don't really know what it was, but our machines are fairly complex. So, but it definitely is worth trying one at a time and trying to pinpoint what the thing was. It might be worth taking notes of your personal machine too, because machines do seem to have personalities or preferences. It might be worth noting those sorts of things as well if you're finding them more common. If your machine can't handle, for example, if it likes pre-wound bobbins or doesn't like pre-wound bobbins, that might be helpful to know. You might find that tendency. You might find over a period of a year, if you're tracking the types of problems you have, that it comes down to pre-wound bobbins. And I'm just picking that out of the air. I don't have trouble with pre-wounds, but it might be something that's repeating. And so that might help you to avoid that thing in future too. I think I've read all the comments. Great. Okay, we are past 5 minutes. We're at 17 minutes. Thank you all for joining me this morning. Before you do go, I want to be sure that you know that you're invited to a workshop that I'm hosting this Saturday. It's at 10 a.m. Pacific time. And it's geared toward those that want to do free motion quilting, this all over edge to edge type of quilting that you see a lot of in my social media posts and my photographs. So many quilters or want-to-be quilters say, I could never do that. I don't know how to do that. I'm not an artist. So this workshop is all about 5 myths that tie freehand quilters in knots and how to break free of them. So I'm going to come armed with a lot of photos and examples and show you how I got through some of those obstacles and how you can too if you want to. So I cordially invite you Saturday morning. I've attached a registration link in the show notes so you can sign up there for that. There will be a replay available, but you do need to sign up in order to get the email with the replay, where it can be found, the workbook link, those sorts of things. So go ahead and sign up if you have any interest in that at all, and that way you'll have access to that replay for a few days afterwards too. So I will be back tomorrow, and I think tomorrow, if the lighting is good, because I'm going to kind of be facing a window, I'm going to try and show you my thread storage and how I store my bobbins with my thread, and also what some of my favorite kind of baseline colors are that I think are essential to have on hand, especially if you're getting started in machine quilting. So hopefully tomorrow's topic will be thread storage, and I look forward to seeing you then, and I thank you for joining me today. So I will catch you next time.